The world was once a place of bright colors and the steady weight of a father's hands on Malachi's shoulders. At 4 years old, the rain was just a reason to play, and the loud cracks of thunder were small scares that could be fixed with a hug. But Malachi was different even then. Sounds hurt him. A passing truck felt like a physical blow to his ears. His father called him a lover of spiders, an arachnophile, as they watched a tiny creature crawl near the playground. Then, a sudden boom of thunder made the little boy flinch, and his finger crushed the spider by mistake. His father told him it was only sleeping, but Malachi knew better. He had caused its death. That was the first time the heavy weight of guilt settled in his chest, and it never truly left. The warmth vanished quickly. Soon, the house smelled of beer and neglect. His mother, lost to her own demons and grief, locked him away. Malachi spent days alone in his room, sitting in soiled diapers that burned his skin, listening to the loud music that masked his mother's temper. She blamed him for his father leaving. She hit him when he cried for a bedtime story. To survive, Malachi learned the power of silence. If he didn't make a sound, maybe the big bad men who visited his mother wouldn't notice him. On his 5th birthday, his mother gave him a card and a box. Inside was a letter from his father saying his mind was a dark place he had to leave, and a large tarantula named Rex. Rex became Malachi's only friend, his silent protector in a house that had become a tomb with windows painted black. The end of that life was a nightmare of shadows. 2 men paid his mother $50 for access to the boy. They gave her enough drugs to kill her while Malachi hid under the bed. When they found him, they mocked his smell and his silence. They took Rex and pulled the spider's legs off one by one, demanding Malachi beg for his mother's life as she choked on the floor. Malachi stayed silent. He watched his only friend die and his mother slip away, paralyzed by a horror he couldn't name. By the time he reached the hospital, his father had taken his own life too. Malachi was an empty shell, a boy who chose to never speak again, counting to 10 in his head and waiting for the world to vanish. For 4 years, Malachi was a broken toy passed between foster homes. No one wanted a boy who only used sign language and stared with cold, unblinking eyes. On his 8th birthday, he was told a family had actually chosen him. He didn't believe it until he stood in the airport and saw a 7-year-old girl with a smile that looked like sunlight. Olivia treated him like a prince from the moment they met. She wasn't afraid of his silence. In a quiet bathroom, he tried to show her he couldn't talk, and she promised to teach him, unaware that he didn't want to be fixed. When his new foster father, Malachi Vize, arrived with a cold, disciplined glare, Malachi didn't care about the man's rules or the strike system. He only cared about the girl. He decided then that he belonged to Olivia. He had failed to protect Rex and his mother, but he would never fail her. By age 12, Malachi had grown into a giant, a silent shadow trailing behind his popular sister. The other kids called him a freak, but their words meant nothing. Only Olivia mattered. When he saw 3 boys bullying her on the playground and stealing her hair ribbon, a violent, protective rage took over. He didn't tell a teacher. He waited. He used his heavy school bag as a weapon, cracking it against their heads and chasing the main bully through the halls until he could land a heavy punch. The consequences were expected. A lecture in his father's dark office about the family's reputation and the threat of the orphanage. Malachi shook with the fear of being sent away, signing a desperate plea to stay. Jameson kept the violence a secret from Olivia to preserve her image of her anchor, but Malachi knew the truth. He was a problem child, a violent boy managed by therapists, but as he held a sleeping Olivia that night, he knew he would do it all again. At 17, the bond changed. The protective brotherly love Malachi felt had turned into something dark and addictive. During their morning jogs, he found himself watching the way Olivia's body had changed, berating himself for the poisonous thoughts in his head. He hated the shared earpieces and her pop music, yet he craved every second of her presence. By the lake, when she wrapped her legs around his waist to avoid being thrown in the water, the physical contact hit him like a plane crash. He wanted her. He wanted to kiss his sister, and the realization made him feel sick and desperate. He wondered if there was a medicine to stop such a fucked-up desire, knowing his father would kill him if he knew the truth. The jealousy became a physical ache when he learned their mother was arranging a date for Olivia with a man named Parker Melrose. The thought of another man touching her made Malachi want to tear the world apart. He went to his parents' office and made a shocking proposal: remove him from the adoption records so he could be her suitor instead. His parents reacted with visceral disgust, calling him vile. To stay in the house, Malachi lied, claiming he only loved her as a brother. But the lie didn't stop his obsession. He began to live in a world of secrets, sneaking into her room to comfort her during her period or nightmares, all while hiding a darker truth. Malachi had turned the Vize manor into a surveillance state. He installed hidden cameras in Olivia's bedroom and bathroom, spending hours watching her most private moments. He felt they were connected, even when apart. One night, after a frantic search through the rain when she called him while drunk and lost, he found her asleep in his own bed. He locked the door, creating a private world for just the two of them. He undressed her and cleaned the makeup from her face, his hands trembling with a predatory urge he could barely control. He looked for marks from other men, finding none, and in a moment of lost control, he pressed his lips to her. He wanted her to be his first, and he wanted her to be awake for it. The next morning, the air in the room was thick with unspoken truths. They lay entwined in the bed, both pretending to be asleep but both fully aware of the other. Malachi felt her fingers graze his chest and knew she could feel his arousal. The line between brother and lover had been crossed in the silence of the night, and as Olivia stealthily retreated through the balcony to avoid being caught, Malachi was left alone with a singular, violent certainty. He would dismantle their parents' world and destroy any man who stepped near her. He was no longer just her protector, he was the shadow she could never escape. The frustration in Malachi's chest had grown into a physical weight, a pressure that demanded release. He had already come close to being arrested for beating a man who looked at Olivia with the same hunger he felt, but his parents only used his violence as a tool. They threatened him with charges to force Olivia into dates with safe boys like Adam and Parker Melrose. To Malachi, there was no such thing as a safe man for her. During a family camping trip to the mountains, the thin walls of their shared tents made every sound a torture. Malachi was frayed, his head pounding from a hangover and pills, but his eyes never left his sister. He sat beside her in the car, using the secret language of their phones to demand she hold his hand. When she tried to retreat into the sibling excuse, he whispered a dark truth. He knew she touched him in her sleep. The shock on her face was all the confirmation he needed. That night, the mountain air turned predatory. With their parents away for a walk, Malachi dragged Olivia into their tent and padlocked the zipper, trapping them in a world where the Vize name meant nothing. He forced a game of strip questions, a high-stakes interrogation where every honest answer cost an item of clothing. He watched her vulnerability with a cold, focused heat, dismissing her insecurities and demanding she reveal herself. When she clung to the word brother, Malachi shattered her reality. He confessed to the hidden cameras, admitting he had watched her most private moments for years. The revelation was a bomb, but the game kept her pinned. By the time they were both exposed, the sibling taboo had become an aphrodisiac. He explored her body with a hunger that ignored her protests, bringing her to a climax that left them both breathless. But when he reached for a kiss, she blocked his mouth. She called it a mistake. The rejection sent him spiraling into a panic attack in the dark woods, gasping for air as his father found him, a broken son drowning in a black void. The mistake did not stop him, it only made him more dangerous. Malachi moved from a voyeur to a predator. He spent his nights slipping into her room while she slept, or watching her through the one camera he left active. He convinced himself she wanted to be watched. One night, fueled by a conversation about his mother's sleeping pills, he crossed a line he could never uncross. He crushed the tablets into her water glass, masking the bitter taste with orange. He hid in her closet and watched her drink it. As the drug pulled her into a heavy, unshakable unconsciousness, Malachi emerged. He felt no guilt, only a twisted sense of control. He undressed her limp body and touched her with a clinical, obsessive focus, mapping every inch of her skin while she couldn't say no. He deleted messages from other men on her phone, his possessiveness growing into a fever. He left her bed messy and took a photo for his collection, a silent trophy of a night she would never remember. The manipulation deepened into a phase of lessons. Malachi played the role of an innocent, lying to Olivia by claiming he had no experience so she would teach him how to kiss. He watched her take the bait, her sisterly protection turning into a romantic guide. He climbed through her window, staged dates with other girls to spark her jealousy, and waited for her to crack. When she finally kissed him, the world shifted. He let her lead at first, but when she admitted she liked roughness, his restraint snapped. He pinned her down, his hands gripping her throat as he took control of the lesson. He took satisfaction in the deception, knowing he had already claimed her while she was drugged, yet he relished the way she arched under his touch while awake. But the euphoria was short-lived. An overheard conversation between their parents revealed a truth that set Malachi's blood on fire. Olivia had taken a morning-after pill. She hadn't been a virgin. The realization that another man had been there first shattered his protector delusion. He demanded the truth, and Olivia admitted she had been pressured into sleeping with a suitor to secure an arranged match. Malachi's rage was a living thing. He vowed to kill any man who touched her again, his love turning into a violent, exclusionary oath. He fixed her hair with trembling hands and escaped into the night, his mind fixated on a single question. Who was the man who had her first? The tension boiled over at his mother's birthday pool party. The manor was filled with the elite, but Malachi only saw targets. He watched Parker Melrose approach Olivia repeatedly, his father's disdain for the boy matching his own. Amidst the loud music and fake smiles, Olivia pulled him away to the pump house under the guise of a filter repair. In the humid shadows, she took the lead, straddling him and deepening their lessons with a confidence that both enthralled and enraged him. They were caught in a cycle of mutual addiction, a secret world that was suddenly exposed when Malachi's friend Mason found them. Mason saw the truth in Malachi's eyes and called it messed up, but Malachi didn't care. He used Mason's own secrets as leverage, forcing him into a silent alliance. The end of the social masks came when Olivia sent a frantic location pin. Malachi didn't hesitate. He gathered his punk circle, armed them with bats, and put on a mask. They raced to an upscale house where the music was too loud and the intentions were dark. Malachi burst into the basement like a storm. He heard Olivia explain what Parker Melrose had tried to do, and the last shred of his humanity evaporated. He ordered her to leave and turned on the boys in the room. It wasn't a fight, it was a slaughter. He used his bat and his fists to break anyone in his path, his rage fueled by every date and every touch Parker had forced on her. He dragged a screaming Parker Melrose out into the muddy backyard. The rain turned the earth into a grave. Malachi forced Parker's face into the mud, holding him there until he nearly drowned before pulling him up to hear him beg. He didn't want a quick death, he wanted a permanent reminder. He revealed his face, letting Parker see the brother who was ending his future. With a clinical, heavy swing of the bat, Malachi broke one of Parker's legs. Then, as the boy shrieked in the filth, he broke the other. He left Parker broken and sobbing in the dirt, a mangled mess of a man who would never walk toward Olivia again. As Malachi walked away, blood-stained and breathing hard, he felt a dark, cold satisfaction. He had removed the rival. He had protected his prize. In the silence of the rainy night, he knew there was no going back. Olivia belonged to him, and he would burn the whole world to ensure she stayed in the shadows of his love. The fragile peace of the Vize manor shattered under the weight of a single, devastating realization. Olivia finally saw the truth behind Malachi's lessons. She confronted him with a fury that burned through their shared history, accusing him of being a predator who had manipulated her into teaching him things he already knew. The betrayal was physical. She called him a freak and a manipulator, her words hitting harder than the objects she threw at him. Malachi tried to use his silence and his touch to pull her back, to force a physical connection that would override her anger. In the heat of their desperate, resentful struggle, the bedroom door flew open. Jameson Vize stood there, witnessing the ultimate transgression. The secret was out, and the world Malachi had built for them exploded. What followed was a descent into the void. Malachi lost all restraint, his mind fracturing as he turned on his adoptive father. It wasn't a fight, it was a brutal, systematic assault fueled by years of being the unwanted son and the problem child. He attacked Jameson with a clinical, terrifying loss of control, ignoring Olivia's screams and pleas for him to stop. When the red mist finally cleared, the house was a crime scene. Jameson lay broken and bleeding, and Olivia sat on the floor, her hands stained with her father's blood. As the sirens wailed in the distance, Malachi reached for a cigarette, leaning against the wall with a hollow, disturbing calm. He didn't fight the police when they arrived. He knelt, felt the cold click of handcuffs, and kept his unblinking stare fixed on Olivia until they dragged him into the night. The legal system processed the Vize boy with a cold efficiency that matched his own detachment. Malachi refused to plead insanity, accepting a sentence for attempted murder that effectively ended his life as he knew it. In the outside world, Olivia was drowning in a different kind of prison. Her mother, Jennifer, became a ruthless warden, using the family's reputation and Olivia's own childhood trauma as weapons. She pressured Olivia to testify, painting Malachi as a dangerous monster who had targeted their family. Olivia struggled with the crushing weight of guilt, believing she had betrayed her anchor, yet she ultimately broke under her mother's control. She agreed to the testimony on the condition that Malachi receive help, a promise that felt like a lie the moment it was spoken. In a final act of self-preservation and protection, Olivia wrote a letter of love and regret to Malachi in prison, only to burn it before it could ever reach him. She chose to become the obedient daughter, cutting the cord to save them both from a hope that would only cause more pain. Prison changed Malachi, hollowing out what was left of his sanity. He spent his days in a world of grey stone, surviving only by imagining Olivia beside him, talking to a ghost that no one else could see. When he was finally released, he was a different man, fractured, dissociative, and unable to anchor himself in time. His mind began to slip between realities. One moment he was in the woods, exhausted and running from invisible demons, watching Olivia with a gaze that viewed her more as a possession than a person. He felt the intrusive, violent thoughts creeping in, fantasies of harming anyone who dared to step between them. Then, with a sudden shift of light, he would find himself back in their bedroom, the forest vanishing like a dream. He was an unreliable narrator in his own life, a man who couldn't tell the difference between a memory and a hallucination. The reunion was not the fairytale Malachi had constructed in his cell. He clung to Olivia with a desperate, suffocating intensity, refusing to let her out of his sight. He dismissed the years of trauma and the blood between them, insisting that they were already together and that nothing needed to be discussed. To Malachi, history was an immutable bond. To Olivia, it was a wound that needed to heal. She pushed for normalcy, begging for boundaries and the chance to live a life that wasn't defined by their obsession. She wanted to work, to date like regular people, and to build a healthy relationship from the ruins of their past. But Malachi was fundamentally incapable of being normal. Every suggestion of independence from Olivia triggered his deepest insecurities and his most controlling impulses. He admitted he didn't trust her, fearing that the moment she stepped into the light, she would realize he was the monster her mother said he was. He resisted her idea of starting over, viewing it as a threat to the only thing that kept him sane. He didn't know how to be a boyfriend or a brother, he only knew how to be her shadow. The tension in their new life was a living thing, a heavy, sluggish weight that threatened to pull them both back into the dark. As Olivia reached out for a future that made sense, Malachi held on to a past that was covered in blood, refusing to move, refusing to change, and refusing to let go of the girl who had become his entire, fractured reality. The bedroom had become a fortress, but the walls were beginning to feel like a cage. Malachi clung to Olivia with a desperate, suffocating physical need, his arms wrapped around her waist as she dressed for work. He didn't handle the distance well. Every time she tried to create space or move toward the door, his mood soured, his silence turning heavy and sharp. Olivia felt the shift. She saw the instability in his eyes and the way he refused to engage with anything that wasn't her. She was starting to realize that the man she loved was also a man she might need to save from himself. She thought about their parents, about the blood on the floor from years ago, and she knew Malachi was getting worse. He refused therapy unless she forced it, and he viewed the rest of the world as a threat to the fragile bubble they had built. While Malachi stewed in his obsession, Olivia was fighting a war on two fronts. At her office, she was drowning in work and the silent, looming threat of Xander, the man she had refused to marry. Xander's messages were dark and controlling, a shadow following her through her phone. She hid them from Malachi, knowing his fragile mind would snap if he saw another man claiming her. Then came Jennifer Vize. Her mother didn't enter the office with love. She came with the cold fury of a woman whose reputation had been tarnished. The argument was a collision of two worlds. Jennifer demanded obedience and the arranged marriage to Xander to save the family name. For the first time, Olivia stood her ground. She chose the freak over the fortune, accusing her mother of treating her like an asset rather than a daughter. She walked away from the Vize wealth, but the cost was a mother who now looked at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. Malachi, meanwhile, was performing a different kind of penance. He sat in speech therapy sessions, repeating words in his head while his tongue felt like lead. He looked at Dr. Preston's progress pyramid and felt like a clinical experiment. He wasn't doing this for himself, he was doing it for Olivia, a performance of normalcy to keep her from leaving. He hated the multisyllable words and the way the therapist poked at his brain, suggesting group therapy and new diagnoses. Inside, Malachi was a coil of tension. He lied about his medication, claiming he was fine while the fear of abandonment pounded in his skull like a drum. He felt like an alien trying to learn a human language, all while his mind drifted back to the dark, violent impulses that felt more natural than any spoken sentence. The external world finally collided with Malachi's internal war outside the courthouse. He had waited for Olivia for hours, his calm dissolving into a frantic, rain-soaked paranoia as the sun went down. When the doors finally opened, it wasn't Olivia who stepped out, but Jennifer. The confrontation was brief and brutal. His mother didn't see a son, she saw a cancer. She slapped him, her hand stinging against his skin as she blamed him for Olivia's ruin. She told him that Olivia was crying because of him, and in that moment, the last thread of family loyalty snapped. Malachi watched her leave, his thoughts turning to elimination. He began to consider removing the obstacles, his parents, Xander, anyone who stood between him and his prize. He found Olivia at her old apartment, broken and sobbing. The sight of her in pain caused a physical ache in his chest, but it was also a moment of dark triumph. She was back in his arms, promising she would never leave, even as she admitted she felt trapped by her mother's pressure. Malachi comforted her, but his mind was already moving toward a permanent solution. He suggested they leave everything behind, but Olivia refused. She still cared for her father and her sister, Molly. She still wanted the normal life he couldn't understand. The contrast was made painfully clear when he followed her to visit Anna's newborn twins. Watching Olivia hold the babies in a bright, healthy home made Malachi feel like a monster in a museum. He refused to go inside, his discomfort turning into a blunt rejection that hurt her. He couldn't participate in a world of first steps and happy families when his own mind was filled with surveillance footage and the sound of breaking bones. The pressure to be normal reached its peak during an outing with their younger foster sister, Molly. Malachi was forced to play the part of the protective older brother, a role he used to inhabit but now found exhausting. Molly was a burst of energy, trying to use sign language and treating him like he wasn't a convicted criminal. Despite his internal resistance, the old instincts were still there. He moved to protect her from traffic, a flash of genuine care that he immediately tried to suppress. He watched Olivia try to bridge the gap between his darkness and Molly's light, but he felt the distance growing. As they walked toward a store for Molly's shopping trip, the weight of the day settled on him. He felt the eyes of strangers, the judgment of his mother's slap still burning on his cheek, and the looming shadow of Xander's black car. He was a man out of time and out of place, a predator wearing a human mask that was starting to slip. He looked at Olivia, realizing she wanted a life he might never be able to give her, a life of sunlight, grocery stores, and safety. As he stepped through the doors, Malachi felt a cold, familiar dread. He was losing the war against the world, and the only way to win was to drag Olivia back into the dark with him, away from the sisters and the babies and the normal people who didn't understand that love was meant to be a cage. The morning air in the Vize manor was thick with a new, quiet kind of dread. Malachi stood in the center of the bedroom, a statue of sweat and tension, his mind once again lost to the void. He didn't sign or speak, he simply stared at the wall while his internal world screamed. Olivia, sensing the fragile state of his sanity, guided him back to bed like a wounded animal. Before he drifted into a heavy sleep, he whispered a rare apology, admitting the noise in his head wouldn't stop. When he finally woke, the storm had passed into a strange, domestic calm. Olivia found him on the floor, watching a tarantula crawl across his skin. He named her Cordelia, his voice steady and intelligent as he explained her nature. For a fleeting moment, they were just two people sharing a quiet interest, a rare glimpse of the man Malachi could have been if the world hadn't broken him. But the world was finished being quiet. At Olivia's office, the atmosphere shifted from professional to predatory. Malachi appeared without warning, his behavior erratic and confrontational. He locked the doors, his eyes burning with a fresh, raw agony. The secret the Vize family had guarded for years had finally leaked. Mason, Malachi's only true friend, had died the very night Malachi was arrested. His parents had hidden the truth to protect his mental state, but to Malachi, it was the ultimate betrayal. He wasn't just a criminal, he was a man who had been denied the right to grieve his brother. The revelation destabilized him completely, turning his grief into a volatile rage directed at the only person he had left. Olivia could only watch as he spiraled, the weight of the family's deception crushing what little trust remained between them. The internal family war was interrupted by a much larger, more dangerous force. The Reznikov family arrived like a debt collector coming for a soul. Led by the cold Igor and the aggressive Xander, they treated Olivia like a piece of property they had already purchased. They presented contracts and demanded she leave with them immediately, citing an arrangement that ignored her humanity. The meeting was a battlefield of fractured loyalties. Jameson Vize, still recovering from Malachi's previous assault, finally found his spine, challenging the legality of the deal and refusing to let his daughter be sold. But the Reznikovs held a trump card, Jennifer Vize. Xander revealed that Olivia's mother had accepted a massive payment to secure the match. The realization that her own mother had placed a price tag on her life left Olivia hollowed out, trapped between a powerful criminal empire and a mother who viewed her as a transaction. The tension snapped in the parking lot of Olivia's workplace. As she walked to her car, the Reznikov threat turned into a physical reality. She was grabbed from behind and forced into a vehicle, the doors locking on her freedom. Malachi, who had been trying to create a normal date for them, saw the abduction through his surveillance network. The predator inside him didn't hesitate. He didn't call the police, he became the law. He tracked the signal into the dense forest, his bike roaring through the trees until he intercepted the kidnappers. With a singular, violent focus, Malachi attacked. He killed the driver to get to Olivia, his hands stained with blood as he pulled her from the wreckage. He was her protector again, but the cost was a body that needed to disappear. The aftermath forced a transformation in the Vize family. They returned to the manor, where the truth of the kidnapping collided with Jennifer's cold indifference. She reacted with hostility, refusing to help and dismissing Malachi's actions as those of a monster. But Jameson Vize made a different choice. He looked at the boy who had once tried to kill him and chose to become his partner in crime. In a blood-stained alliance, father and son drove to Malachi's farmhouse to dispose of the kidnapper's body. Jameson didn't ask questions. He simply worked alongside Malachi, covering up a murder to save his children. During the gruesome work, Jameson saw the evidence of Malachi's darker history, the hints that this wasn't the first life the boy had taken. He kept the secret from Olivia, choosing to protect her from the full depth of the darkness she lived with. The final betrayal was discovered on a dead man's phone. While they cleaned the blood from their hands, Malachi checked the kidnapper's messages. He found a log of a paid delivery arranged with the Reznikovs. When he called the number responsible for the coordination, the voice that answered was the most devastating blow of all. It was Jennifer. Their mother hadn't just allowed the kidnapping, she had orchestrated it. She had sold her daughter's safety to ensure her own status and power. The woman who had rescued Malachi from the foster system was the same woman who had tried to feed Olivia to the wolves. Back at the house, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of bleach and the metallic tang of blood. Malachi washed the forest from his skin while Olivia watched, the reality of her mother's treachery settling into her bones. They clung to each other in the quiet, trying to define a relationship that was now bound by murder and betrayal. Malachi showed a rare, clumsy vulnerability, his usual control giving way to a need for comfort. He promised they would fight the Reznikovs together, refusing to run from the war his mother had started. They stood in the shadows of the manor, two survivors of a family that had cannibalized itself, preparing for the final confrontation. Suddenly, the heavy silence was broken by the sound of footsteps. Malachi's hand went for a weapon, his instincts screaming of another attack. Olivia froze, expecting the Reznikovs to come through the door to finish what they started. The tension was a wire ready to snap until their father's voice called out, breaking the spell of violence. But he wasn't alone. Molly, the innocent younger sister who knew nothing of the blood on the farmhouse floor or the mother who had sold them out, skipped into the room. She looked at the two of them, her face bright and untainted by the horror of the last 24 hours. Amidst the hidden evidence of a killing and the wreckage of their parents' marriage, she asked a single, jarring question that echoed in the dark room. "Can I see the spider?" It was a haunting reminder of the normal life they were leaving behind, a splash of innocence in a house that was now a tomb for secrets. The Vize Manor, once a fortress of secrets, became a slaughterhouse in a matter of minutes. Malachi stood at the center of the collapsing world as Igor Reznikov's men stormed the house with the cold efficiency of an army. The air was filled with the deafening cracks of gunfire and the screams of his family. Malachi's first instinct was primal protection. He snatched Molly from the chaos, shoving her into a hidden crawl space with a silent command to stay safe. He turned back into the fray, even as a blade found his flesh, fighting through the searing pain to reach Olivia. But the numbers were against them. He watched in agony as Olivia and his father were forced to their knees at gunpoint. Igor's voice cut through the air like a guillotine, giving the order to end him. A bullet tore into Malachi's chest, then another. As he collapsed, his vision blurring into a red haze, he felt his father's hands on him, calling him son for the first time in his life. Before the darkness took him completely, Malachi's mind drifted to a single, golden memory of a 7-year-old Olivia in a princess dress, smiling at him before the world went silent. While Malachi lay in a coma, Olivia began her own war of survival in a luxurious tomb. Held captive in an old asylum-turned Reznikov estate, she paced the peeling wallpaper of her room, counting steps to keep her mind from shattering. She was a prisoner of a marriage contract signed in her own mother's greed. To stay sharp, she engaged in a dangerous deception, pretending to drink the drugged tea provided by her captors while secretly pouring it into the carpet. In the haze of the manor, she overheard the fractured loyalties of the Reznikov brothers, realizing that even Xander was a victim of Igor's tyranny. Her hatred for her mother grew into a cold, hard stone, but her belief that Malachi was alive remained her only anchor. She refused to break, even when Igor threatened to kill her father, holding on to the hope that the anchor she loved was coming for her. The hope of escape nearly became reality when Xander, driven by his own resentment of his father, led Olivia through hidden paths to a back alley where Abigail waited. The reunion was a brief, emotional spark in the dark. Olivia learned the truth. Malachi was alive, though broken and unconscious. But the Reznikov Empire was too vast to slip through so easily. The escape was betrayed from within, and Olivia was dragged back into the manor's clinical shadows. To ensure she would never run again, Igor ordered a horrific punishment. He had a lethal tracking device surgically implanted in her arm, a kill switch that would end her life instantly if she tried to leave or if the device was tampered with. The procedure was a brutal display of dominance, leaving Olivia branded and more controlled than ever, her freedom tied to a piece of tech designed to execute her. 3 weeks after the massacre, Malachi woke to the rhythmic hum of hospital monitors and the crushing weight of failure. His body was a map of scars and stitches, but his mind was focused only on the empty space where Olivia should have been. His father was there, a man transformed by the violence they had shared, refusing to leave his bedside. The news of Olivia's captivity and the lethal tracker hit Malachi like a physical blow, nearly sending him back into a spiral of madness. But a new force entered the room, Adrix Reznikov. The banished brother offered a path to vengeance, revealing the vulnerabilities of the estate and the upcoming masked ball that would serve as their only window for infiltration. Malachi didn't care about the politics of the Reznikov bloodline. He only cared about the extraction. The recovery was a grueling race against time. Malachi stared at his reflection, the jagged scar on his chest a constant reminder that he had let them take her. He pushed his body through the pain, fueled by a singular, cold fury. In the quiet moments, he found a strange solace in Molly, who had become the keeper of his spider, Cordelia. She signed to him with a proud, shaking hand, reminding him that he had saved her once and must now do the same for Olivia. The bond between the broken siblings strengthened the steel in Malachi's spine. He wasn't just a predator anymore, he was a soldier with a family standing behind him. His father watched over his medication and his rest, an unexpected ally in a war that had cost them everything. The planning meeting brought together a coalition of misfits and rebels. In a room filled with Vize allies and Reznikov defectors, the anti-Igor alliance took shape. They studied the blueprints of the estate, mapping out the technical assault that would require a drone and an electromagnetic pulse to blind the manor's security. The mission was a surgical strike: infiltrate the masked ball, disable the kill switch, and extract Olivia before the Reznikov guards could react. There was no room for error. The communication blackout meant they would be fighting in the dark the moment the pulse hit. Malachi sat among the strategists, his silence more powerful than their arguments. He volunteered for the most dangerous role, refusing to let anyone else be the one to pull Olivia from the ruins. He listened to the technical details of the tracker's removal, knowing that one wrong move would mean her death. But he also saw the resolve in the eyes of his father and his friends. They were no longer the problem children of a wealthy family. They were a strike team prepared to burn the Reznikov legacy to the ground. As the meeting concluded and the masks were prepared, Malachi felt a familiar, dark certainty settle over him. The time for stalking from the shadows was over. He was going into the heart of the enemy's home to take back what belonged to him, and he would either walk out with Olivia or ensure that no one else walked out at all. The plan was set, the weapons were ready, and the silence of the night was about to be shattered. The night of the masked ball at the Reznikov estate felt like the edge of a sharpened blade. Malachi moved through the grand, clinical halls of the old asylum with a singular, lethal focus that ignored the heavy, rhythmic throbbing of his unhealed wounds. He was no longer a ghost or a patient. He was a storm waiting for the signal to finally break. He wore his mask like a second skin, blending into the crowd of elite monsters while his mind tracked the seconds. The operation began with a silent, high-tech strike as Barry's drone deployed the electromagnetic pulse from the dark sky above. In a heartbeat, the world went black. The security cameras died, the electronic locks failed, and the Reznikov stronghold was plunged into a chaotic, analog vacuum. Malachi didn't need the light to find her. He navigated the corridors by instinct and raw memory, his heart hammering against his ribs until he reached the heavy door where Olivia was caged. There were no words, only the frantic, physical relief of pulling her into his arms and rushing her toward the hidden exit before the backup generators could flicker to life. He felt her trembling against him, her weight light and fragile, and he knew he would never let her go again. The escape was only the first half of the desperate battle. They raced away from the estate to a secure, hidden location where the air smelled of antiseptic and cold desperation. Olivia was free from her room, but she was still tethered to Igor by the lethal tracking device buried deep beneath her skin. The extraction was a high-stakes surgery performed under a ticking clock, with every second feeling like a lifetime of potential grief. Malachi watched with his back against the wall, his hands trembling with a rare, helpless terror as Barry worked with surgical precision to disable the device without triggering the charge meant to end Olivia's life. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the steady sound of breathing, until the soft, metallic click of the device being removed echoed against the walls. The leash was finally gone. For the first time since the massacre at their home, Olivia was truly hers again. The immediate threat of the Reznikovs had been dismantled, replaced by the heavy, exhausting realization that they had finally survived the war. The story shifted away from the blood and the sirens into a 3-year jump of quiet, intentional healing in a place where no one knew their names. They didn't stay to pick up the pieces of the Vize reputation. They vanished completely. In a new home, far from the shadows of their parents' sins, Malachi and Olivia built a life that looked, for the first time, like the normalcy she had always craved. Malachi found a deep, grounding peace away from the violence, channeling his protective instincts into a professional life at an animal sanctuary. He spent his days in the quiet company of creatures that didn't judge his silence or his scars, his intelligence finally applied to something that didn't involve surveillance or breaking bones. He enjoyed the manual labor, the way the sun felt on his back, and the simple joy of returning home to a woman who loved him without conditions. They were no longer the Vize siblings to the world. They were a husband and wife, their bond forged in trauma but sustained by a conscious choice to be better than the people who had raised them. The ultimate anchor arrived with the birth of their son, Isaac. For Malachi, parenthood was a total transformation that grounded his obsessive nature into something constructive and soft. He watched Olivia become the mother she never had, loving, present, and fiercely protective of the small life they had created. Malachi practiced his speech every single day, his progress no longer a forced performance for a clinical therapist but a necessity for his son's growth. He became a father who communicated in both signs and spoken words, ensuring Isaac grew up knowing he was safe, protected, and deeply wanted. The darkness in Malachi's mind hadn't vanished entirely, but it had a place to rest and a reason to stay quiet. His old obsession with possessing Olivia had evolved into a sacred duty to provide a safe, warm harbor for the family they had built from the jagged ruins of their past. He looked at his son and saw a future that wasn't written in blood. 12 years passed, and the echoes of the Little Liar had faded into a sophisticated, settled legacy. At a grand charity event in Scotland, the air was filled with the scent of expensive perfume, the clinking of crystal, and the low, polite hum of the global elite. Malachi stood in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, a man who had mastered the art of the human mask, his hand resting comfortably and possessively on Olivia's waist. They were a vision of Vi's confidence and grace, but the true evidence of their success was standing nearby. At 14 years old, Isaac was the living image of his father. The same sharp features, the same intense gaze, and the same broad shoulders, but he lacked the broken, haunted look that had defined Malachi's youth. Isaac moved through the crowded room with a healthy, inherited arrogance, untainted by the foster system, the blacked-out windows, or the trauma of a broken home. He was a boy who knew he belonged exactly where he stood. Malachi watched with a quiet pride as Isaac's eyes landed on a girl across the room by the punch bowl. She had dark hair and looked exactly like her mother, a familiar face from the complicated world they had left behind. Isaac didn't hesitate for a single second. He began to move toward her, his confidence radiating with every step he took through the crowd. Malachi raised a brow at his son, noticing the slight, rare blush creeping up the boy's face, and he gestured forward with a steady hand. Malachi signed good luck with a small, knowing smile. Isaac stopped and looked back at his father, his expression shifting into a perfect, arrogant smirk that mirrored Malachi's own. The boy signed back with total, unshakable certainty. "I don't need luck. I'm a Vize." Malachi shoved his hands into his pockets and watched his son walk up to the girl. He knew exactly who Isaac was attempting to flirt with, and he knew the history and the trouble it would likely bring to their doorstep. A presence came up beside Malachi, a cold beer held in a hand he recognized well from years of tension and shared secrets. It was Cade, watching the interaction between their children with the wary, protective gaze of a man who knew exactly what kind of obsessive blood ran in the Vize family. Cade didn't look at Malachi as he spoke, his voice a low, gravelly warning that carried the heavy weight of a father's concern for his own daughter's heart. "Keep your son away from my daughter," Cade warned, his tone making it clear he was dead serious. Malachi didn't offer a hollow promise of restraint or an apology for his son's intensity. He looked at Isaac, who was already engaging the girl with the same singular, world-consuming focus that had once defined his own life. He looked at Olivia, the woman who had survived everything with him and now stood as the anchor of their lives. Malachi smirked, because they both knew that was not going to happen.